Hi, and welcome back to Epic Life. We have been working through the journey of strength, which is a concept that is found in the book The Way of All Great Men by David Murrow. We've worked through 2 trail markers so far and an intro on this thing called the journey of strength. And I'm super excited that you're joining us today. If you missed any of those, you can of course go back and reference those, watch them, and kind of get up to where we are to help all of this make a little more sense. But for those of you that are rejoining us today we're getting into what's called Trail Marker 3. Trail Marker 3 in the Journey of Strength of the Mountain of Manhood is called Embracing Teachings You May Not Personally Agree With. This is interesting. This is going to be interesting for us today. There's not a ton of scriptural emphasis as much as there is just really more of a, what do we do with Scripture that we really maybe struggle with, right? So let's look at what the lesson for us is. So what's the lesson for us? What do we do when we find a truth in the Bible that we personally struggle with or even disagree with? Things such as hell, judgment, etc. What do you do if you find that you are differing with the Lord on the truths of the Bible? It's a great question. And how you answer it really changes everything. You believe what God tells you and reject your own wisdom. That is honestly the answer. You believe God, you reject self. Because God knows and you don't. Which, to some degree, if this is a struggle for you, you might have to go back and revisit the journey of submission, right? Because a lot of what we're talking about here is actually submitting to God's truth when His truth and your opinions and preferences don't necessarily mesh. It's interesting because the thing is this. You live as though the Bible is true and your own intellect is deceived. That's another very important tidbit here. You have to make sure you understand that your intellect, your knowledge, your thoughts, they are still part of a fallen you. Yes, you've been redeemed if you've accepted Christ into your heart, but you got to remember we're still tainted by the fall. And because of that, you should embrace the teachings of Scripture even if they offend you in some manner. It's interesting because in our culture today, a lot of people struggle. In this postmodernist culture that we're in, people kind of look at themselves as, I get to define what truth is for me. As a Christian, you can't walk in strength unless you let God's truth define truth for you. I can guarantee you this. As you read the Bible, you will encounter doctrines that bother you. You may disagree with teachings on marriage, money, sexuality, authority, and others. And Jesus' answer to you is, so what? Who made you God? Christ doesn't care about your opinion. He's God. You're not. And if what I just said bothers you, then this lesson is definitely for you. Because the hard love here is you are not the master of your fate. You're not the definer of your destiny. God is. A weak man finds something he disagrees with in Scripture and says in his heart, this can't be true because it makes me uncomfortable. It's inconsistent with the God I've created in my head. But a strong man accepts the truth that makes him wince, embraces moral absolutes, teachings that exclude and offend, and doctrines that are out of step with modern public opinion. You know, it's interesting. As a teacher, I have this little Dollar Tree Jesus in my classroom. I found him at the dollar store once, and I thought it was just interesting. They were selling a little plastic figurine, action figure of Jesus. And I bought it because I always wanted to come into school and show kids, hey, is this your God? Like, you know, when people start to kind of make a God that's like kind of, he's more made in their image than they're made in his, I pull out Dollar Tree Jesus and say, you know, guys, when we make God in our image, he's about as worthless and as powerless as Dollar Tree Jesus right here. I don't know about you, but I don't want Dollar Tree Jesus being my God. If God is just this little like thing that you pull out of your pocket every once in a while to make you feel good about yourself, he's not your God. He's not even real. It's just a figment of your imagination. So, my challenge to you today in the biblical sense, like biblical scriptures and passages, is this. What scriptures and passages come to mind as a struggle for you? What are some solid Christian truths that are just you struggle with, right? And I really want you to ask yourself the question, are you willing to submit to God's truth and lean on His ways, right? Are you willing to trust in Him with all your heart and not lean on your own understanding, right? If you're willing to do that, I think you're well on your way to continuing up the path of strength. The prayer for us, for the third trail marker is this. The third prayer of a disciple of Jesus should be this one. Lord, is there any pride in my life that is preventing me from submitting to the expectations of the Christian community you have placed me in? Right? So asking God, where are some teachings maybe at my church that are like I'm struggling with? Now, there's a difference between submitting to truth and submitting to heresy, okay? So make sure you get Berean about it. Get into your word, test it, make sure it's actually God's truth, right? If someone's telling you Jesus isn't really God, obviously you shouldn't be submitting to that truth. So take some time to really think that through, which leads us to our good practical stuff today, our GPS in case we get off the trail, which is this. Jesus had the courage to counter the wisdom of his day. Do you? Do you have the wisdom to stand in the face of false truths in your modern context? Thank you for joining us for Epic Life. Next week, we'll continue our discussion of the journey of strength as we get into Trail Marker 4. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you then.